This is the 6th episode of Make the Connection: Real Veterans, Real Stories. In each installment, we'll explore different topics related to veterans' personal experiences with mental health challenges and how they found support. Since its launch in 2011, Make the Connection has interviewed over 600 veterans from all service eras and military branches. They got help and their lives got better. So can yours. Veterans everywhere share the common bonds of duty, honor, and service to our nation. And whether your military role ended 2 decades ago or 2 days ago, you may still face challenges that can affect your health and relationships. Over the last 5 episodes of this podcast, we've shared stories of real veterans who have confronted their mental health challenges and found solutions. And while every veteran's story is unique, they each share a common thread: the importance of community. The veteran highlighted in today's episode, Amber, talks about the power of shared experience, a valuable tool for those facing mental health challenges. When veterans transition back into civilian life, the immediacy of the military community may be gone, but those bonds never completely disappear. No matter how isolated you may feel, there is always a community of veterans out there waiting for you, ready to offer their support.
My name is Amber, and I served in the Army for 10 years. I was PAO, so Public Affairs, and that's kind of like the Army journalist. And then we also get to do PR later on in our career. So first few ranks, you get to write and take photos, and those are your glory days. And then later on, you get to facilitate the press and help to build those press relations and do press releases. And that's the next part of the job. But that was what I did. Well, when I first started serving, obviously, I wasn't thinking about deploying, but I learned quickly that we were going to be going to Afghanistan in a short period of time. So where I really started to get my writing and my photography chops was Afghanistan. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2006 and stayed there for 16 months. So I got to spend a lot of time as a journalist and a photographer traveling all over Afghanistan and taking photos of some of the most amazing stuff.
As part of that work, Amber covered memorials in Afghanistan, collecting information on service members who had lost their lives. She remembers watching as members of a platoon would mourn the loss of a comrade.
It was my responsibility to photograph the memorials downrange. So whenever we lost a soldier, it was PAO's responsibility to go out and photograph the memorials. So you flew to be with the guys, with the platoon or the company who's just lost their fellow comrade, and they're crying and they're holding each other. And after 16 months of watching men clutch each other and cry and ask each other why, and see the confusion and see the way that after they'd lost several of their fellow comrades, the way that it wore them down, that had an effect. For us, for PAO especially, it's our responsibility to collect the information from those who've been lost on the battlefield, do the press releases, let the press know that we've lost someone on the battlefield. So we have that folder on our desktop, but that's KIAs. It's just a folder of dead people, of dead soldiers. And those things have an effect. And you don't think about it when you're in the service because death becomes your life. War has to do with death on a grand scale, and you don't realize how desensitized you become. You don't realize the walls that you build to keep yourself from being hurt by what you're a part of.
For a long time, Amber relied on those walls to shield her from the difficult reality of what she was witnessing. While in the thick of it, it was difficult for her to see how she was being affected by her experiences and how it might affect her in the future.
I spent a lot of time with infantrymen, but I didn't think that I've got problems. I haven't had to fight the enemy as much as these guys. I haven't had to go through all the stuff that these guys have been through. So, I didn't think to myself, like, war has really messed me up. You don't realize the ways in which the deployments have an effect on you per your job. So everyone has a different job, and so they're going to be affected in different ways, sometimes at different times. But nonetheless, war is war. And war is not easy. And no matter how you interject yourself into war, it's going to have an effect on you.
It wasn't until Amber returned home from Afghanistan that she realized the walls she built for herself while deployed couldn't shield her forever. Amber found herself drinking too much, or drinking on top of the pain medication she took for her neck and back. The loss of support and community that the military provided left her feeling isolated and adrift.
Initially, it was wonderful. Initially, I was like, I'm free, and I traveled, and I just was one with the wind. And then I decided that I probably need to get back into school and get a job, because the civilian world doesn't take care of you quite like the military takes care of you. And the military does. The military provides you with family. It provides you with a job, and you keep that job no matter what, and your job is going to be going to war, and it's all cut and dry, and you always get your paycheck, and you're taken care of. The military takes very good care of the people it trains to go to war for its country. It wasn't like that in the civilian sector. There was so much more to think about. There was so much more to take care of, and it was overwhelming. I started to experience anxiety attacks, depression, isolation. I didn't want to be around other people. I had a hard time making friends before, and then it became increasingly difficult. It got to the point where, because of my anxiety attacks, I didn't want to leave my house.
It took Amber years to realize that the mental health challenges she was experiencing were connected to what she had witnessed in Afghanistan.
I was doing an interview about women in combat, women on the front lines, and I had the interviewer asking me what it was like to be at war, and I kept trying to tell her the way things were from a troop standpoint, the way that I'd done it as a journalist. The guys did this, and whenever we would come in contact, the guys would do this, and the guys would retaliate this way. And she kept saying, Amber, tell it from your standpoint. You always revert to the guys. And I realized that was one of my walls, was telling it from a different standpoint as opposed to my own. She asked some really pointed questions, like what does a bullet sound like when it whizzes past your head? What does an explosion sound like whenever it's close to you? And those questions were very pointed. And I answered them. I gave her what she wanted for the interview. It turned out good. But I spent the remainder of the afternoon in my storeroom at work crying.
Since leaving the service, Amber has worked with women who have experienced military sexual trauma, helping them address their symptoms and navigate the process of filing disability claims. It was those women who helped Amber realize that she was dealing with something herself.
I have a nonprofit of my own. It's called American History Theater. I'm a co-founder, and then our founder is a Navy veteran. And through the nonprofit, I work with women who have been the victim of military sexual trauma. And so working with these women and dealing with their PTSD, dealing with how they approach disability claims. So in dealing with all of these women who had these emotional scars, these women veterans were actually the ones who encouraged me to get help. And they were the ones that noticed in me the symptoms of PTSD. But those women are the ones that said, listen, Amber, you've got PTSD. You're a mess. And I really thought I was together. I mean, I got my nonprofit and I'm having these events and I'm helping other people, and I was not taking a look at myself at all. And I was trying to inadvertently fix myself by trying to fix everyone else. And then I realized I had to step back and I had to look at myself. I knew I had to get help. And so I turned to the VA. I just called my primary care provider and I said, I need for you to put me in a referral.
With the help of a therapist, she began to take action. They pinpointed her triggers, like loud noises or being stuck in traffic without any control over the situation. They built a plan for dealing with a panic attack. They began to address the ways in which war was still affecting her.
I went to see a wonderful woman, and she was a good therapist. She was incredibly intelligent. And I've had therapists before, but none that were quite as objective as she was. And she was kind of tough, where she would say, Amber, look at yourself. Do you realize what you're doing? But it was her that helped me to understand ways that I can deal with an anxiety attack, how to put together a plan. If I'm in a social situation and all of a sudden I feel something coming on, what am I going to do? I need to make sure that if I think I'm going to be put in a situation that's going to trigger me, I need to make sure that I have an idea of what I'm going to do. I'm going to run to the bathroom and cry. What am I going to say to the people that I'm with? So those were the first steps of treatment, was to how to get a handle on it so that I could continue to function in the world. Because when I first ran into PTSD, I wasn't functioning well. I was terrified, constantly terrified. So initially what she wanted to do was just make sure that I wasn't freaking out in traffic or in a ball on the side of the road, just crying. And so that's just been the main part. And then starting to dig around and understand in what ways war has affected me.
Amber's therapist also helped her understand the importance of community and connecting with fellow veterans.
So I reached out to Vets for Warriors one day while I was having an anxiety attack, and it worked. A gentleman that I talked to had the same amount of deployments as me. He had the same symptoms as me, and it made me feel so much more part of something. You don't realize how estranged you feel when you leave the service because that's your tribe, that's your people. You don't realize how attached you are to them, and so whenever you leave the service, it's hard to find other people like that. So when it comes to treating yourself for military-specific mental illness, it's very important that you find your tribe.
The importance of this veteran community was reinforced for Amber one day when she found herself having her first panic attack in the waiting room at VA. She had felt it coming all day. There she was in a pharmacy waiting room, and the talk all around her was about war. Specifically, she remembers, about jumping out of airplanes.
It felt like this cacophony that was just too much, just out of nowhere, and I got tunnel vision. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't speak. And there was a gentleman next to me who kept trying to talk to me, and I was able to eke out to him, "I'm usually much friendlier than this. I'm sorry, I'm not talking to you, but I'm having an anxiety attack right now. I'm not really sure what it's from." Well, he was able to discern in that moment that it was a PTSD anxiety attack. And he said, "Do you have any outlet? Do you have any way that you're letting this out?" And I looked at him and I said, "No." Then the gentleman just reached out and he took my hand and he said, "You have to find a way to let it out." He was like, "I don't know how you're going to do that." He said, "But you have to find your way." And then he just held my hand and he told me it was going to be okay. He said, "Don't worry, you're going to be okay. Everything will be fine." And then other veterans in the room realized that I was going through something, and they looked at him and he said, "She's just having her moment. She's just having her come to Jesus moment." And then other veterans came and held my hand, and everybody was there for me. I guess if I was going to break down, it was the perfect breakdown. But in that moment, although it was bad and I didn't have control and I felt so scared and I felt so small and I felt like I was completely lost in just my terror, just the fact that I had those other people around me and those other people that knew what that looked like, that was huge. And that showed me in that first moment, this is where your healing is.
Amber's experience with mental health has inspired her to reach out to other veterans, building coalitions and communities of people dedicated to supporting one another.
Now that I recognize the symptoms within myself, it emboldens me to definitely reach out, and also gives me more of a tool in the work that I choose to do, the advocacy that I choose to do, because it's something that other veterans who are going through the same thing can relate to. And I can extend it as the olive branch and say, "Hey, well, this is what my symptoms looked like. Can you relate?" To an extent, it has helped me help others. It just helps me to understand them on a deeper level. But I think that's life. And understanding yourself on deeper and deeper levels, you're able to understand others on deeper levels.
Amber encourages anyone who might be feeling isolated or experiencing challenges with mental health to reach out for support.
My advice is just don't be afraid. Don't think that you are too good to go out there and get help. Don't think that you're that person that has gone through your military service or gone through your combat tours unscathed. Get to the VA and talk to somebody. Get into a support group. Understand the fact that the military gave you a family. And now that family's not going to be there. So you have to kind of figure out who your support group's going to be now, who's going to be your tribe. Take advantage of the VA.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Make the Connection, Real Veterans, Real Stories, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Visit MakeTheConnection.net, an online resource designed to connect veterans, their family members and friends, and other supporters with information, resources, and solutions to issues affecting their lives.